You could be living with a psychopath, and in this video we're going to go through a checklist which has been scientifically proven to highlight high risks of harm and even indicate risks of psychopathy and sadism in somebody who you may be intimately connected to. And be sure to stay to the end of the video where I will identify my #1 question which I used to ask people when I was in the police to really highlight any risk factors. So without further ado, grab a pen and let's dive in. Now the first question is very simple. Has this incident resulted in injury? Is the person, the complainant, injured as a result of what the other person's done? And this is the first question what the police will ask. And this is because if somebody is able to injure somebody else, it means that they have little regard for this other person's safety. Thus is a high risk indicator, because this means that if someone can harm somebody, then what else could they be capable of? Number 2, are you very frightened? What's it like living with this person? Are you scared of what's going to happen next? Are you scared of further harm? Are you afraid of saying the wrong thing when they pull up in their car after coming home from work? Does it make your skin crawl? What is it about this person that makes you afraid? And are you constantly living in a state of fear? This is a good indication of control, because if somebody can make somebody else fear them, then it means that they can control them. They can control what this other person does, what they say and how they act. Then we look at, is this abuse happening more often? Is this an isolated incident and everything's been fine up until this point? Or is this showing a pattern of behaviour? And also, is this abuse actually getting worse? Can we see a clear escalation of behaviour? Was it everything was great to begin with? And then what's happened is over time, the devaluation has started, the love bombing has stopped. And then we begin to identify a pattern. And then we can see the escalation as to where things may go in the future. And this is really good from an investigation standpoint, because it not only gives the police lines of inquiry to follow if there have been previous incidents before, but it also highlights to the victim, this is clearly a pattern, and they've said the sorry before and then something else has happened again. This clearly shows that this incident is not isolated. This is this person's behaviour, and therefore it's only going to get worse. Has the abuser ever threatened to kill you or harm somebody and you believe them? This is a very high risk question, because even if the perpetrator has no intention of harming or killing the victim, it means that they are, 1, capable of saying it, whether the victim believes them or not, and 2, if the victim does believe them, then that's further control. They may never have the intention of going through with any kind of threat like that, but that's not always the point. The point is to make the victim believe that that is something which is in the future, thus meaning that the perpetrator can continue their control over their victim. And if a threat like this is made, it really needs to be taken seriously, because in 50% of stalking cases, the threats of violence are carried out, and in domestic homicide cases, 95% of them had an element of stalking, and about 60% had an element of coercive control, and near enough all of them had previous violence or threats of violence in the past. This next one is something which really used to make my ears prick up because of its links to future homicide. And this one is, has the abuser ever attempted to strangle, suffocate or drown you? If someone's partner grabs them around the throat and applies pressure or tries to strangle them or drown them, this is not necessarily a failed homicide. The intent of the perpetrator in that moment wasn't necessarily to kill the victim. It's all about control. It's, I could end your life if I wanted to. By me restricting your breathing, that gives me absolute power over you and instills utter fear. This was always one which, if they said yes to this, would significantly increase my risk factor. Even if all the other answers were no, for somebody to put their hands around someone's throat and to intentionally restrict their breathing shows that they have the intent, or at least the capability, to go further with that. And like I said, it's not necessarily a failed homicide attempt, it's a successful attempt at trying to control and manipulate and instill fear into the victim. Do you know if the abuser has previous history with the police or with the criminal justice system, or has a criminal record? The best indicator for future behaviour is past behaviour. Now, sometimes we hear people say, well, I got with this person, my ex was crazy and they got me done for X, Y and Z. And okay, sometimes that does happen. People can make malicious allegations. But if there's a pattern, a continued pattern of 3 or 4 different people who've made allegations, are they all going to be false? Or is it just the person that you're with, or this person that you know is trying to convince you that all the rest of them were false, all my exes were crazy, and I'm not really like this, while still showing you that they are? The cognitive dissonance that happens in cases like this is quite powerful, because the victim of the abuse has heard these previous allegations, and they've been made to believe that it's false and it's not true, while the evidence is right in front of them of this abusive behaviour. And yet sometimes they still convince themselves, well, it must have been my fault then. I'm clearly the one who did something wrong because I pushed them too far. We have the evidence that they've done this in the past. They're now doing it to you. Do not blame yourself. They are the problem. This is what they do. And in my experience, a serial domestic abuser, a psychopath, a narcissist never changes. They get better at manipulating people. They get better at not getting caught. Do you feel isolated from family and friends? The amount of incidents which I dealt with where the victim would say, I used to see my friends every Friday, or I used to go and speak to my mum quite a lot. And then following meeting this person, within a few months, I suddenly wasn't speaking to my mum as much. I can't go to the shop on my own. They constantly look through my phone and accuse me of cheating on them. Suddenly, I don't speak to any male friends or any female friends anymore, and their social circle has been reduced to the point where it's simply just them and the abuser. And this is exactly what the abuser wants. An abuser wants complete control over the victim, complete power. They want them to be isolated, to be alone, and to be vulnerable with no way of asking or seeking help. Because if there is less outside influence, then there's less people to highlight to the victim that the situation they're in isn't normal and the situation they're in is dangerous. Every case I worked on, which involved elements of controlling and coercive behaviour, all had this in common. The abuser would slowly isolate the victim from their support network, and it happened every time. It is always intentional, it is always calculated, and it serves one purpose, and that is to make the victim fully dependent on the abuser. The next one is, have you tried to separate from the abuser in the past year? This again is significant because we know from looking at statistics of domestic abuse, people that get into narcissistic relationships, psychopathic relationships, relationships with a sadist, relationships with an abuser, we know that it takes around 7 to 8 times for the victim to actually leave that relationship for good. Several times there are attempts where the victim will try to leave, but the perpetrator manages to convince them to get back into the relationship. And often when they do, everything's perfect. It's the best relationship they've ever had. They're back on the roller coaster, they're back on the high bits, and they are getting love bombed, they are getting gifts, flowers, sexual attention, sexual gratification, they're getting gifts, they're getting compliments. Everything that they could ever want, which they had in the beginning of the relationship, is now back. But it doesn't last very long. And each time this relationship cycle starts again, the escalation of devaluation and abuse often comes around much quicker, and it's often much more severe the next time round. And the difficulty is a psychopath, a narcissist, they're very charming, they're very, very good at getting people on their side. And charming behaviour and manipulation is not something which is innate. We don't naturally have that ability to do that. It's something that's learnt, and if you've got someone who's 30, 40 years old, then they have been doing this their entire life, and they are very, very good at it. Does the abuser try to control everything you do? This one's pretty self-explanatory, and this is a high indicator of a controlling partner, of someone who is potentially a psychopath. If someone tries to control everything you do, tries to tell you what clothes you have to wear, when you can and can't go out, who you can and can't speak to, your social media usage, your usage of your phone, what money you can and can't spend, even how you can speak to them and how you can address them, and where you can and can't eat and what time you can and can't eat. Control and coercive behaviour, abusive relationships are often referred to as being policed in your own home. It's like having a judge, jury and executioner living with you, and they're criticising and they are constructing rules which you didn't know were there until you break them. Thus meaning that you are under a constant state of fear. This is why they call it walking on eggshells, because you don't know what you're going to do, which will set off the next explosion, the next escalation, the next act of violence. Also, if you're not allowed to work, or if you do claim benefits, the abuser takes those benefits off you and they're paid into their bank account, so therefore they have control over your money and they give you what they think you should have. That's abusive. And that's not okay. These next 2 questions are related to stalking, okay? Now, stalking is very loosely defined in law. Stalking is any behaviour which amounts to stalking, and it's defined quite loosely because it can encompass so much when it comes to actual stalking behaviour. Does the abuser constantly text, call, contact, stalk or harass you? So let's come up with some examples. You're out with your friends, they're calling you all night, asking what time you're home, asking where you are, asking who you're with. You're at home, they're asking you to prove where you are by taking photos of yourself. They demand that you keep your location settings on at all times so they know exactly where you are. If they ring you, you feel you absolutely have to answer, because to not answer that phone when the abuser's contacting you, it will be the end of the world. You'll be accused of absolutely everything. So therefore it's easier just to comply with their requests and what they're saying, because they only want to make you feel safe, and they only, you know, they've been cheated on in the past, and they just get a little bit paranoid, a little bit insecure, and they just love you so much that they don't want anything bad to happen. Does all that sound familiar? Because if it does, it's utter bullshit. They're basically just trying to control you, and they want to know exactly where you are. Stalking is generally more indicative once the relationship's over. And when stalking happens, like I said before, there is often threats of violence, and 1 out of 2 stalkers do carry out these threats, which is why stalking has to be taken incredibly seriously, and it has to be dealt with really, really quickly and robustly by the police. An abuser wants to control their victim. They don't want to lose that control, which is why stalking is so prevalent in domestic abusive relationships. And then we can also get into stalking by proxy. If they are asking your friends to check upon you, or their friends to check upon you, or they're contacting your parents' house, or they're contacting your work, or your friends to see where you are. If they're creating different social media platforms or social media profiles to try and contact you. The level of stalking and how it can be done cannot be underestimated. And there are new ways being invented all the time as technology increases. It's something which we really have to be on the ball with, and really have to treat much more robustly and much more strongly than we actually do. Now, when we look at psychopathy, we look at sadism, there are some specific questions here now. Now, this relates to the first question of, has this incident resulted in injury? This one is, have they ever used objects to harm you? Because if they're willing to use an object, that shows much more severe intent. Then this shows a lack of empathy, it shows a lack of remorse, and a lack of fear of consequences in relation to an injury being caused. This is a clear sign of psychopathy and a clear sign of sadism. And also, when it talks about relating to a criminal past, have they ever hurt anyone else? A family member, a child, an ex-partner? Have they gotten into multiple fights in the past when they've been on a night out? If the answer to these is yes, then, like I said, previous behaviour is the best indicator for future behaviour. If you know they have a violent past, then we really need to highlight this, and we need to look into this and say, well, they have previous history for harming people. What's to say they're not going to harm you in the future? And it relates to a lack of empathy, it relates to a lack of consequence, and a lack of care that if they're able to hurt other people and really not feel any remorse for it, or they're able to use an object in order to hurt somebody, it's a clear indication that this person is not healthy, this person is dangerous, and you need to get away from this person as fast as possible. And we also want to look at the toll which this kind of abuse could possibly have on the victim. And one question what they ask is, are you feeling depressed, or are you having feelings of self-harm or wanting to end your life? This is to further paint the picture of the effect which the perpetrator's actions and behaviour are having on the victim. Then we talk about the abuser a little bit. So we want to know a bit more about the abuser, about their state of mind, and about what is called the toxic trio. So mental health, drugs and alcohol abuse. Is that a factor in their life and in their behaviour? Do they have a diagnosed mental health condition? Because as we know, a lot of people who have psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, they generally have a comorbid disorder as well. The same goes for borderline personality disorder and emotionally unstable personality disorder. These are all personality disorders listed under DSM-5, and a lot of relationships and controlling and abusive relationships, the perpetrator would generally fall into one of these categories. That's not to say everyone with these personality traits are abusers, but every abuser has likely got one of these personality traits. So then we need to look at the comorbidities. Do they have depression? Do they have past trauma? Do they have other addictions such as drugs and alcohol, as well as their mental health issues? It's all to paint a picture about the abuser so that the services understand exactly who and what they're dealing with. This next one is a huge red flag, and that is, has the abuser ever attempted or threatened suicide? When I've dealt with severe cases of control and coercive behaviour, and I've dealt with someone who I believe is a psychopath or a narcissist, is when they feel they're losing control, or maybe they've had an argument with the victim, or the victim's said that they don't want to be with them anymore and they tried to end the relationship. The amount of times that I have been told that, and then they went to the woods and they said they were going to hurt themselves, or they sent me a photo with a load of pills in the hand, or they sent me a photo with a noose around the neck saying, if we don't get back together, I'm going to end it all, or I feel worthless and no one will ever love me now that I've lost you, I've got nothing to live for. And a lot of the time the victim falls for it, and it's not the victim's fault. As victims, as normal human beings, we have a level of empathy which is exploited by these people because they simply don't feel it. And because they don't feel empathy, it means that they can exploit other people's empathy for their own gain. And what best way to exploit someone's empathy? By making out that this person is going to end their life or seriously hurt themselves, and it's your fault because, frankly, you put a boundary in the way. You've said, I've had enough of the way you've treated me. I'm not putting up with this anymore. You need to leave me alone. They cannot fathom not having control over this person. And generally what happens is, even when that relationship ends, they will get with somebody else, and this will happen again. And finally, the number one thing, which is a huge red flag, if not the biggest red flag when it comes to these relationships, what happens when you tell them no? When you tell this person no, if they want something, or they ask to do something, or they tell you to do something, what happens if you say no? You don't explain yourself later. Can you borrow me some money? Can we go here today? I want this. No. What happens then? Do they maybe get a little bit upset and want to talk about the reasons? Or do they fly into an absolute rage, a disproportionate rage for what you've said, and make it out like you're the bad one, and how dare you say no to me? Do things escalate? Do things become violent? Do things become verbally abusive? Do they start smashing things up? Do they cause fear? Is it like a baby having a tantrum who's just been told no? And that is the biggest red flag, because a atypical person who has a normal scope of emotions wouldn't fly off the handle just because they've told no. But somebody who is controlling, and somebody who has a lack of emotional intelligence and a lack of understanding that the world does not actually revolve around them, if they have an extreme reaction to being told no, that's all the evidence you need. That's not okay. And if you do witness something like that, you really need to get out. You need to get as far away from this person as possible. If you enjoyed this video and you want more videos like it on this kind of topic, then feel free to subscribe, and also let me know in the comments if any of this has resonated with you and you feel that you need to get some support or help. I'll put some resources in the description box of this video. Thank you very much for watching, and please check out one of my other videos and consider supporting me on Patreon for the same price as a Starbucks a month. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. Take care.